This is Heart of the Guardians, where the forgotten stories of courage, humanity, and destiny come alive. If you believe that one act of kindness can change the course of history, then this story is for you. The year was 1867. The plains of Texas were wild and untamed, where the whispering grasslands stretched endlessly beneath the burning sun. It was a land of danger and beauty, where every shadow could mean life or death, and every decision could echo through generations. In this rugged landscape lived a man named Britt Johnson, a freed African-American cowboy and homesteader. He had carved a small life for himself and his family on the edge of the frontier, a life of hard work, peace, and resilience. Johnson had known hardship like few others. The Civil War had left deep scars across the land, and in this part of Texas, peace was only a fragile dream. The Comanche people still roamed these plains, fierce, proud, and protective of their homeland. To settlers, they were often seen as enemies. But to Britt Johnson, who had learned to see the humanity behind every face, they were people, warriors, mothers, fathers, children, trying to survive just as he was. One hot summer evening, as the crimson light of dusk melted into the horizon, Britt was tending to his horses near the creek behind his cabin. The wind carried the scent of rain and dust, but beneath it, he caught something else, a faint cry, soft and trembling, like the voice of a wounded bird. He paused, listening. Then it came again, a child's cry. Britt dropped his reins and followed the sound, moving cautiously through the brush. When he reached the edge of the creek, he saw her, a young Comanche girl, no more than 10 years old. Her clothes were torn, her face streaked with dirt and blood. She looked terrified, and when she saw him, she stumbled backward, clutching a small knife with trembling hands. Britt raised his palms slowly. "Easy, little one," he said softly. "I'm not here to hurt you." The girl didn't understand his words, but something in his voice, the gentleness, the calm, made her hesitate. She lowered the knife slightly, her eyes still wide with fear. Britt knelt down, keeping his distance. He could see she was hurt, a cut on her arm, bruises on her legs, and exhaustion that made her sway. He guessed she had been separated from her people, maybe after a raid or an ambush. Out here, alone, she wouldn't survive the night. He extended his hand slowly, offering a piece of bread from his pocket. The girl stared at it, then at him. Her hunger betrayed her fear. After a moment, she reached out and took it, biting quickly. That was enough for Britt. Without another word, he lifted her gently into his arms and carried her back toward his cabin. Inside, his wife Mary looked up in surprise. "Britt, who is she?" "I found her down by the creek," he said. "Looks like she's been through hell. I couldn't leave her there." Mary's face softened with worry. She fetched clean water and bandages, and together they tended the girl's wounds. The child flinched at first but soon relaxed, her eyelids drooping with fatigue. As the fire crackled low that night, Britt sat in silence, staring into the flames. He knew the risk he had taken. Sheltering a Comanche girl could mean death. The tribes were known to retaliate fiercely if one of their own was taken or harmed. But his conscience wouldn't let him turn her away. When dawn broke, the plains seemed unnaturally quiet. The morning wind carried a tension that made even the horses uneasy. Britt stepped outside, scanning the horizon. Then he saw them. Dark shapes emerging from the mist, 1, 2, then dozens more. Within minutes, the entire horizon was alive with movement. Warriors on horseback, their feathers streaming, their spears glinting in the rising sun. 70 Comanche warriors. They rode in silence, encircling his cabin like a tightening noose. Britt's heart pounded, but he stood his ground. He knew why they had come. Inside, Mary gasped, clutching the little girl to her chest. "Britt, they're going to kill us." He turned to her calmly. "Maybe. But maybe they came for her." The girl's eyes lit up when she heard the distant cries of her people. She ran to the window, shouting words they didn't understand. Britt raised his hands and stepped outside. The Comanche chief rode forward, a tall, imposing man, his face painted in red and black, eyes sharp as a hawk's. His warriors waited behind him, their horses snorting, their bows drawn. The chief dismounted slowly, every movement deliberate. His gaze swept over Britt, assessing him. Then he said something in Comanche, his tone harsh and commanding. Britt didn't understand the words, but he could feel their meaning. The chief wanted to know what he had done with the girl. Without fear, Britt turned and called into the cabin. "Bring her out, Mary." Mary hesitated but obeyed. She led the girl outside, the child clutching her hand. When the chief saw her, his stern expression cracked. He spoke softly, his voice trembling just slightly. The girl broke free and ran to him, tears streaming down her face. She threw her arms around his waist, sobbing. The mighty warrior bent and held her close, murmuring words only she could hear. Britt exhaled slowly. The girl's father. The warriors around them relaxed, lowering their weapons. Some murmured among themselves, their eyes shifting between Britt and the chief. The chief lifted his daughter into his arms and turned to face Britt. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, two men from worlds apart, bound by an unspoken understanding. Then the chief stepped forward and extended his hand. Britt hesitated, then took it. Their hands met, dark skin against sun-bronzed, and in that simple gesture, centuries of mistrust seemed to fade for a moment. The chief said something to his men, and the warriors began to turn their horses. But before he mounted, he reached into a pouch at his waist and pulled out a necklace, beads of turquoise and bone. He placed it in Britt's hand, pressing it gently. A gift, a sign of honor. Then, with a final nod, the chief rode away, his warriors following in a wave of thunder and dust. Within minutes, the plains were silent again. Britt stood there, the necklace glinting in his palm, his heart heavy with awe and relief. Mary came beside him, tears in her eyes. "Britt," she whispered, "you could have died." He looked at her and smiled faintly. "Maybe. But that little girl would have, too." The next evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, Britt sat on his porch watching the sky bleed gold. He turned the necklace over in his hands, thinking about what had happened. In a land divided by race, fear, and vengeance, one small act of mercy had bridged a gulf no treaty ever could. Days passed. Life returned to its rhythm, the chores, the cattle, the endless sky. But word of the encounter spread through the frontier like wildfire. Settlers whispered about the black cowboy who faced down 70 Comanche warriors and lived to tell it. Some said it was luck. Others said it was divine grace. But those who truly knew Britt Johnson understood, it was something deeper. It was respect. That event marked a turning point. The Comanche did not raid Johnson's homestead again. Some even said they protected it, silently acknowledging the man who had saved one of their own. Years later, old-timers would gather around the fire and tell his story. How a man, born into bondage, rose above hate and fear to do what was right. How the courage of one heart could disarm 70 warriors. And how, in a time of blood and vengeance, compassion proved stronger than any weapon. If you stood in those plains today, you might still feel it, the whisper of wind through the grass, carrying the memory of that morning. You might imagine Britt standing before those warriors, unflinching. You might see the glint of turquoise in his hand, and the child's small smile as she rode away safe in her father's arms. That's the power of humanity. When one person chooses kindness over fear, they become a bridge between worlds. Britt Johnson's story reminds us that heroism doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it's quiet, a decision made in a heartbeat, a hand extended instead of a weapon raised. Long after the dust settled, people remembered that day not as a tale of battle, but as a lesson in grace. A freedman and a Comanche chief, both guardians of their own people, standing on opposite sides of history, yet united, if only for a moment, by the life of a child. This was more than a story of survival. It was a story of redemption, courage, and the quiet power of doing what's right, even when the world around you is filled with hate. That is what Heart of the Guardian stands for, the belief that even in the darkest times, the human spirit can shine bright enough to guide others home. So the next time you face fear or uncertainty, remember Britt Johnson, the man who stood alone against 70 warriors, not with a gun, but with compassion. Remember the little girl whose life changed the fate of 2 worlds. Remember that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the strength to act with love despite it. Because every heart that chooses mercy becomes a guardian of humanity. This is Heart of the Guardians. If you believe in stories that honor the courage, dignity, and light within us all, then make sure to stay with us, because there are many more tales waiting to be told. And as always, thank you for watching. Stay brave, stay kind, and keep your heart open. Because sometimes, the smallest act of kindness can echo across generations, just like Britt Johnson's did on that unforgettable day when 70 warriors rode to his door, and left in peace.